Welcome, everyone. This is Free Thinkers United podcast. Today is our very first episode in a series to raise awareness of the issue of human trafficking. I'm your host, Randy Delgado, and I'm pleased that we're kicking off this series with a very important Q&A session. Questions were previously gathered from members of our Facebook group, which is the Sheboygan County Fight for Freedom Human Trafficking Awareness Group. I started this group back in August with the high hopes to get conversations going about this hidden crime. I truly believe that collectively we can make a difference in our community. We all can work together to make it safer for our family, friends, coworkers, and peers. I believe that starts by networking with others and getting educated on what human trafficking is and how we can prevent this crime altogether. Even if you don't think there's a place for you in this fight, I'm here to tell you that there is. And more than ever before, we need people to come forward and be volunteers for our community. We need to step up and be a voice for the men, women, and children who are exploited every day. And speaking of volunteers, co-hosting with me today is Andrew Danhof, who is Vice President of Freedom Cry. Andrew, can you please tell our viewers how you ended up in this fight against human trafficking here in Sheboygan County?
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Randy. And thank you so much for putting this together. This is
Thank you.
fantastic. Really looking forward to this. So I first started to learn about modern day slavery probably about 10 years ago, which seems embarrassingly late in life to really figure out that human trafficking is a thing that's happening. But it's never too late to get into this fight. For a bit, though, it really kind of seemed to me like human trafficking and modern day slavery was something that happened in other countries, far away from the US or in big cities in the US. I never really thought that would be something that would be taking place here in Sheboygan. And then it was probably about 2014. I went to a presentation by another detective from the Sheboygan Police Department and really got keyed into the fact that human trafficking isn't just something happening out there, but it's something that's happening right here in our own backyards. It was at that same presentation, that same meeting that I got to meet Charlie and Jennifer. And with them, along with some other people from the community, we went on to form what would become known as Freedom Cry, the Anti-Trafficking Coalition of Sheboygan County. And really our mission at Freedom Cry is just that we want to see an end to human trafficking in the broader sense, but specifically working in on Sheboygan and how can we work with other people in the community and other organizations and other groups in our community to try to drive out human trafficking from our county.
Excellent. And wow, what a great story. I'm so glad that there's people like you who are volunteering for this cause. I truly believe this is a cause that we can all get behind. And your story also serves as a reminder of the critical role that law enforcement plays in this fight. I believe that law enforcement is so important. Our local law enforcement here in Sheboygan County has put in a great amount of work combating this issue. And I always love hearing about the positive impact that they've made within our community, especially when it comes to the prevention of human trafficking. This is such a shameful crime that robs the lives of so many. So our special guest today is Detective Brandon Kehoe with the Sheboygan Police Department. Detective Kehoe does all of the investigations into human trafficking here in Sheboygan County. And we're so thankful that you've set aside some time today to have this discussion with us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate your time as well.
Thank you. So let's just jump right into it. Detective Kehoe, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to focus on human trafficking in your law enforcement career?
Absolutely. I've been in law enforcement for 16 years now. I've got promoted last year in August to detective and kind of filled in with the role of human trafficking coordinator that Detective Tamara Remington started after she retired. For me, I have two kids. I'm married and do a lot of work with kids outside of work, and it just kind of seemed to be a good fit that, to help the people that cannot help themselves. And that's kind of what's motivated me to be very proactive and aggressive with this really important issue. And I'm trying to do everything I can to combat this, heinous crime in our community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all that you do.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And we're excited that you're they're part of our community now and part of the fight in our community now. So obviously, I just want to take a step back here just for a brief minute. Obviously, we're talking about human trafficking this today, and I think it might be good for us just to really quickly give an overview of what human trafficking is. At Freedom Cry, we like to use the acronym AMP, AMP, which stands for Action, Means, and Purpose. Basically, the definition, so to speak, around this is that human trafficking is the act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining people for labor or services by means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of exploitation. And for it to qualify as human trafficking, you really need to have an element from each of those three categories, the way that I understand it. So, and then in the U.S., human trafficking, there's labor trafficking happening here, but the statistics from what have been reported really seems to be that sex trafficking is happening at a lot higher rate in the U.S. Than labor trafficking, according to the current statistics, anyway. And that, you know, human trafficking, it impacts everybody. You know, there isn't any one demographic that's any more or less impacted. It's women, men, children, foreign nationals, citizens. You know, there isn't really any single face to human trafficking, but there are vulnerabilities that open people up to human trafficking. I would really encourage people to, you know, this is a really quick overview. So dig into this more. If in your time, I'd really encourage you to do that. Check out our website, freedomcryinc.org, and our Freedom Cry page on Facebook. But Detective Kehoe, you know, we kind of talked earlier. I mentioned how human trafficking happens everywhere. You know, it's worldwide, it's everywhere in our country, and that there have, in fact, been human trafficking cases reported in all 72 counties in Wisconsin. But I'm just curious, from your perspective, you know, how much have you really seen in Sheboygan when it comes to human trafficking?
You know, it's really hard to get a good sense of how much of an issue it is, because this is, you know, kind of a dark thing that takes place where it's not visible. It's not like drug dealing where you're seeing the hand-to-hand transaction on the street corner. It's a little bit more covert than that. What I've seen mostly has been more of the sex trafficking. I haven't really dealt with this with the labor trafficking nearly as much, but you hit the nail on the head with the definition that coincides with the Wisconsin state statute, which is really what we go with, whatever the letter of the law is and the elements. That's what we're pursuing. As far as what we've seen, obviously our eyes have been opened a couple times to some of the operations that we've done, and what's always concerning to me is the people that are willing to travel to. You know, we're in close proximity between two pretty good sized cities, one being Milwaukee and one being Green Bay, and I-43 being right there. So it isn't difficult for, you know, people to travel, you know, from one city to another to engage in this type of activity. So it isn't just centrally focused on Sheboygan County. You can have offenders coming from other areas too to come here, and it's concerning. The last operation that we did in a couple weeks ago, you probably saw the news release on that. You know, there were people coming from all over southeast Wisconsin that were cooperating with our undercover chatters. So it's not just centralized here in Sheboygan. It's kind of all over southeast Wisconsin right now.
I think that's why it's just so important that we all make sure that there's knowledge of this first and foremost, because I'm sure that there's still people out there who don't even believe that this is happening. So again, just thank you guys so much for doing this today and raising awareness of this crime, because it does happen right under our noses. And when you don't know what to look for, it's hard to identify it. So, Detective, do you know what the average age of a trafficking victim is here in Sheboygan?
I wouldn't say there's an exact age where I can pinpoint, you know, it's this specific age. Most of the victims or you know, individuals that are involved with this type of activity have been under the age of 21. A lot of the people that I've debriefed that were formerly victims of trafficking that have kind of moved on and no longer are involved with that, thankfully. It was more rampant between that 14 to 21, 14 to 22, that more underage is when we're seeing a lot of that. The cases I've worked have been mostly, you know, under the age of 18, since I started doing this last year.
Okay. And, you know, with the victims being younger like that, it's very important to recognize how impressionable they are and that there's a great deal of psychological manipulation that goes into this. So what are some tactics that you've seen traffickers use to lure victims here in the county?
I think the biggest tactic, unfortunately, is social media, and it can be used for good things like what we're doing today, or it can be used for
Right.
bad things. And they capitalize on that. And I think one of the biggest concerns that I have is how many young people have unlimited access with their smartphones and their technology to be able to access anything on the internet. And that's certainly something that traffickers are using to their advantage, is that they can get information to people very quickly and recruit people really, really quickly, and have people that are in their little human trafficking network do the same thing as well. So I think social media is one of the big ones. The pandemic obviously has changed probably some of that as well, because there's less contact with responsible adults for our at-risk youth. So it's probably perhaps a little bit easier now than it has been in the past, just because of that issue.
Yeah, so the COVID-19 pandemic definitely has affected those tactics in that way. So also building off of that, with COVID-19 affecting our infrastructure, what are some things that law enforcement and other agencies are doing to keep our most vulnerable safe? For instance, we know that schools oftentimes serve as a safety net to recognize indicators of child abuse and neglect. So with some schools closing and then switching over to virtual learning, how will we continue to keep children safe?
I'd be lying if I said it hasn't been a challenge since March. The hill has been a little bit harder for us to climb, but I have a great working relationship with Sheboygan County Child Protective Services. We meet monthly. We've been doing it this way over Zoom rather than in person, and we get the opportunity to talk about kids that are at risk, information that we're hearing about, sharing intelligence, and I think that's really one of the best ways to try to level the playing field for us. It has been difficult with schools being closed and that less contact with responsible adults, because we get so much information from teachers and even their friends. That has been a little bit difficult for us, but we have to adjust our tactics and adapt to what's changed. And I think a lot of stakeholders coming together and trying to share information and how we can give resources to these at-risk youth. That's been vital, and that's been something that we've been trying to focus on really since this all started in March of this year.
That's so important. And it's very, very important to recognize the role that the internet does play. It does make it a lot easier for these traffickers to recruit victims. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and no, and you mentioned, Brandon, a little bit, just how COVID-19 has kind of changed some of your tactics for helping. It's not as easy to see. The teachers don't have that pipeline. They don't have that connection with their kids so much anymore. And maybe if we can just look a little broader as well, what can you share with us maybe about the strategy for combating human trafficking here in Sheboygan? Is there, you mentioned you talk with Child Protective Services regularly. Is there a group of police and detectives or interagency groups that are working together? I guess kind of along with this, maybe to follow up that question, what sort of preventative measures are you guys taking to try to keep human trafficking and from even coming into the county in the first place?
Absolutely. So to the first part of your question, I have a phenomenal working relationship with the law enforcement partners in our community. So Detective Scott Whelan from the Sheriff's Department, he kind of handles human trafficking for the Sheriff's Department, and we work together on cases. I have a really close working relationship with different special agents at the Wisconsin Department of Criminal Investigation. They're very, very proactive with their human trafficking investigations, and we're sharing emails all the time to be aware of either traffickers or victims or trends that we're seeing. So I'm fortunate that I have a really great professional working relationship with a lot of people who are in the same fight against human trafficking as well. The second part of your question is that's kind of what's motivated me to be a little bit more active on social media from a professional standpoint. That's something that really hasn't been happening quite a bit. Obviously, a police officer being very, very active on social media. Two things. I try to make contact with parents that are concerned about the behavior of their kids. So sometimes it's simple as me going to somebody's house and interacting with the parent and the child, trying to understand kind of what's going on, what the family dynamics are. and educating parents on the dangers of unlimited use of technology, because a lot of times, parents are finding concerning things on a phone that are kind of that like benchmark of being an at-risk person for human trafficking. So spending a lot of time in living rooms and talking to people about, hey, you need to be more aware of what's happening with your child. And if you're not, this could potentially be a gateway to some, very concerning behavior. And then again, just putting a lot of awareness out there on social media on what qualifies as an at-risk youth and why that they're susceptible to becoming a victim of human trafficking, and what a trafficker is actively looking for when they're trying to recruit a child. Those are things that I'm trying to push out a lot of information on, and I think I've been able to engage with a lot of people, and hopefully that's helping try to mitigate some of that. And the less at-risk youth that we have, hopefully that would, in tune, try to prevent traffickers from coming here if they're having less success on recruiting kids to be a part of their network.
Absolutely. I really like the approach that you've taken with your social media. I mean, if it weren't for you being active on there and, interacting with the community, we would have never even, done this. So thank you for reaching out to me. I think you're really bridging that gap between law enforcement and the community. And that's so important because you're here to help and you're really doing a great job. So thank you for that. And can you share with us some of the warning signs that people in our community can be watching for when it comes to human trafficking?
Absolutely. So the big thing with our kids that are at risk for this, and when I say kids, it can be young adults as well, but you need to have responsible people in your life. And I always ask a child that I'm interviewing, hey, can you identify 3 trusted adults in your life? And if they really can't answer that question, that's a problem, because traffickers are looking to target people that are vulnerable, that really don't have an adult in their life that's either caring or looking for them, or going to call the police if they don't come home on time. So that's kind of a big benchmark. I'd be really concerned if there's a change in behavior. I think that's a big thing. If all of a sudden they're acting one way and you start to see trends or just unexplained behavior that really doesn't make sense, that should kind of get your antenna up a little bit. I would say that travel or hotel stays that are unexplained, I think that's huge, because why are you going to a different county? Why are you staying in a motel? I mean, especially if you're a young person, that shouldn't make sense. Being in possession of unexplained valuables, if they have a cell phone and you're not paying for it and they don't have a job, that should be a warning sign of like, where did you get this phone? Who gave it to you? How are you paying for it? I think that's a big thing. Having valuables like hair extensions or nails or purses or just jewelry, things like that are a little out of the norm, that should be something to pay attention to as well. Anyone that has addiction issues or mental health issues, that's someone to kind of pay a little bit extra attention to, because again, they're in that at-risk category where what traffickers are trying to do is fulfill the void that these young people have in their life. So if they're having problems at home, problems with friends, problems at school, those are kind of what they're looking for, to try to gain that trust, build that rapport, make them feel good about themselves, and then unfortunately try to get that net to get them caught up and try to get them susceptible to falling for the trap. So that's kind of a big thing that I would be really, really concerned of. But the best advice I can give for parents is be involved with your kids' life. Be active, know what they're doing, know who they're with, and I think that's really, really important. A lot of these conversations that I've had in living rooms, you start peeling back the onion, so to say, a little bit, and parents are just shocked at some of the stuff that their kids are ultimately ending up disclosing during these conversations. So just be involved, know what's going on, know who their friends are, know what they're doing, and just be aware and be a part of their life, because I think that is probably the biggest prevention aspect is be loving, be supportive, and be involved. And if you can do those things, it's going to make everything else a little bit easier.
Absolutely. I think just being present is so important to recognize, if there is trouble. So, what should a person do if they think they are witnessing an occurrence of human trafficking?
The best thing to do is report it to the law enforcement immediately. All of our patrol officers have been trained in, the patrol response to human trafficking investigations. So the warning signs have been educated department-wide, and we've done a really good job of that, and I'm proud of that. So that's something to really keep in mind. There's a lot of times where I think people see something and maybe they're having a hard time processing what's going on, and they're like, well, is this worth me calling the police or not? It's probably better to err on the side of caution than not, because if it doesn't seem right to you, it probably isn't right. Um, if you're in a position to take pictures of license plates or people, everyone's got a smartphone usually in their hand. If you can do that safely without compromising yourself, I think that's always a good thing, because that helps us build intelligence too. If we can get, a license plate or what a person looks like, I think that's huge. If you suspect that someone in your household is involved in this, I mean, that's something to definitely reach out and contact a law enforcement officer, whether it be, if you live in the city, it'd be me. If you live outside of the city, it'd be Detective Whelan, because even if we can't investigate this and prove what's happening, if we can still get resources and help prevent it from continuing, I think that's really the next best thing. So if we can't identify who the trafficker is or what's happened in the past, if we can just put the brakes on, stop it from happening, and build trust and awareness and prevention and get them piped into some of the great local resources that we have, I think that's really the next best thing. So that would be my goal to accomplish for anyone that needs that.
Absolutely. It's so important that if you do see something that you have a bad feeling about, that you say something. And again, just assess the situation and report it to law enforcement. That is vital, because you'd rather do it than be sorry later on. You never know what kind of impact you could have on somebody's life. You could save lives by doing so. So once you get some reports of suspicious behavior, how do you determine if someone is a victim of human trafficking, and what is the response of the police department?
So we're obviously very victim and advocate driven. So if we suspect that someone's a victim of human trafficking, I'm going to reach out to some of our local resources that we have to help, make sure that they have what they need, deal with the trauma and try to deal with further, acts like that taking place. Really, I'm building rapport and I'm trying to get intelligence about what's been happening, and that is really difficult sometimes, because there is a huge barrier that you have to kind of overcome, that people don't want to talk to you. People have been told that the police are bad and that you shouldn't trust them. So bridging that gap is kind of our first priority, building trust and just treating them like a human being, and not judging them and not making them feel embarrassed about what's happening, because I think a lot of people in the position don't think that we'll understand, and they're worried about being judged and feeling embarrassed and ashamed. So I think it's really, really vital that we come from an objective point of view and just explain that we're here to help. But those are pretty much the main objectives that I try to accomplish whenever I'm talking to somebody who is a potential victim. Sometimes they just don't want to talk to us, and if that's the case, maybe they'll feel comfortable at a later point. But I'm going to focus a lot more on advocates and making sure that they have the resources to feel support, because that's obviously what they're lacking and why they ended up in that position in the first place. So that's usually the main focus for me whenever I have contact with a possible victim.
Yeah, I love that. I love that approach that you talk about, and just the really wanting to help them to get the care that they need and to deal with that trauma. That's it's a big traumatic event that many of these people are going through, and unfortunately, a lot of these kids and teenagers are going through. So I really love that you're. I can hear the heart that you have of just wanting to help people, and that's just so awesome. And I guess I know we're kind of getting to the end of our time here a little bit, but I just had one other question that I wanted to throw out to you, because this year, so at Freedom Cry, one of the big things that we were gearing up for was the golf event that was coming, the Ryder Cup, and then all of a sudden, COVID hit and everything kind of changed, and then that got pushed off. But it did kind of, just as I was thinking about having this opportunity to talk with you a little bit, I'm just kind of curious about what types of protocols and safety measures are you able to share with us that that you guys are kind of putting into effect when we have bigger events like the golf tournaments come into our community, and then even how can the community really partner with you guys specifically when it comes to these types of events?
So the nice part of when you have a big event with a lot of people, that draws in extra resources. So usually if you raise your hand and say, "Hey, we need help. We have a lot of people coming here," you're going to get federal and state agencies that are going to come help and make sure that what needs to be done is going to be done. The most recent operation that we conducted was kind of a preamble to what's probably going to happen next September with the Ryder Cup, and nice part about my working relationship with the stakeholders in Sheboygan County is that with not just law enforcement, but some of the nonprofits and some of the other agencies that are involved with the fight, we talk a lot about media campaigns, billboards, social media awareness, and just doing everything we can to make sure that, the community knows that, hey, when you have a lot of people coming to a specific location, unfortunately, this is a known increase in potential human trafficking activity. So you're going to see a lot of media outreach and a lot of billboards and publicity about human trafficking awareness, and it's something that we're already planning for it as it gets closer, and hopefully it actually does happen. We'll be ready to deal with whatever comes our way, and I think we have a lot of great professionals that are prepared for that type of contingency, and we're ready for it. And the second part of your question, there's so many nonprofits and organizations like yours that people can get involved in, but something as simple as just Big Brothers Big Sisters, find a kid in our community that just needs an adult to help them and make sure that they know that someone cares for them. And I think that's a big thing that really a lot of people can do, and just look to ways to get involved. There's a lot out there, and really have awareness of it. Don't pretend that it's not happening. We live in a relatively safe community. I'm proud to serve this community, but obviously this has happened all over the state, and it can happen here. It has happened here, and I think the more we as a community are aware of that, I kind of go back to the old saying, "It takes a village to raise a child," and it sounds a little cliche, but it's the truth, because you have a lot of kids that unfortunately were dealt a really bad hand at birth with just not having the best family dynamics, and as a result of this, I think we all have an obligation to fill that void. And if we can all team up and help out and use the passion and the heart that we have to make our community a better place, then absolutely that's something that I think everyone's really obligated and should be involved in, is trying to make sure that our youth, our future, is cared for. I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you both for being here with me today. Conversations like this are what will bring further awareness to this shameful crime. Although this is happening right under our noses, we can make a difference, and education on this issue is so important. And I don't want to rest until details that we covered here today are common knowledge. What's done in the darkness cannot exist if we're the light. So thank you for your service, Detective. And thank you so much, Andy, for all you've done with your organization. It does not go unnoticed, and all of your work is critical in combating this crime against humanity. To our viewers, thank you for watching. Always be kind, keep the conversation going, stay safe. Until next time, peace.